The U.S. Navy's most advanced aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, arrived in the Caribbean today, marking the largest buildup of U.S. firepower in the region in generations. It comes just days after President Trump said he had sort of made up his mind about what he'll do in Venezuela. That raises questions about what's next in the region. Mr. Trump and Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro are engaged in a war of words. And since September, the U.S. military has struck 21 boats in international waters as part of an anti-drug campaign. At least 80 people have been killed.
New escalations in the Caribbean today with the Navy's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, now arriving in the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Venezuela, part of President Trump's pressure campaign against the Maduro regime there. It comes just after the Trump administration says it launched another military strike on a boat allegedly carrying drugs in the region.
This is what Trump's war on drugs looks like.
I see boats coming in like loaded up the other day with all sorts of drugs, and we're going to take them out.
The U.S. military destroyed these boats in international waters off of Venezuela's shores. Trump is justifying the controversial attacks as targeting narco-terrorists. It's the biggest U.S. military deployment in the region of the 21st century, and it could also be targeting Venezuela's leader Nicolas Maduro's grip on power. So is this really a war on drugs from Venezuela, or is the U.S. up to something bigger in the Caribbean? The Roosevelt Roads naval base in Puerto Rico was shut down in 2004. For the last 2 decades, it was abandoned and slowly being reclaimed by nature. But now, the U.S. military is back, and with their most advanced fighters, Reaper drones, and Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft. Puerto Rico is a largely self-governed territory of the U.S. The U.S. military buildup is not only on the island, it's taking place across the Caribbean, with warships, aircraft, and even a nuclear-powered submarine. And their sights are set on Venezuela.
It's a significant deployment. We haven't seen anything like this in a generation.
Christopher Hernandez-Roy is an expert on the Americas and on geopolitics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a U.S. think tank.
For a counter-narcotics operation, it is much larger than anything that's ever been seen.
For Trump, it's not just a war on drugs, but on terrorism. His administration has designated several cartels and criminal gangs, among them Tren de Aragua, as terrorist organizations.
That's a big one.
The president's thesis is that Venezuela is run by a drug cartel, and Nicolas Maduro sits at the top of that cartel.
This is what Trump posted. Tren de Aragua is operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro. The series of U.S. strikes on drug boats allegedly run by smugglers from Venezuela has killed dozens. United Nations rights experts have slammed the military strikes as lawless and as extrajudicial executions. The strikes stand in stark contrast to previous U.S. counter-drug operations. The U.S. Coast Guard used to intercept such boats and arrest and interrogate suspected smugglers. Now the suspects are simply being blown up.
Venezuela is deeply involved in the drug trade. It's a very important transit nation.
Jeremy McDermott is co-director of Insight Crime, an organization dedicated to studying organized crime.
Venezuela obviously has an enormous coastline, which is the Caribbean and the Atlantic. The stuff going through the Caribbean, some is bound for the United States, but a significant amount is bound for Europe. But the Pacific is more important than the Caribbean or Atlantic seaboards for drug smuggling into the United States. If we look at this from a drug trafficking perspective, it would indeed make more sense to station this flotilla in the Pacific.
But instead, Trump has zeroed in on Venezuela under Maduro, and it's not the first time. In Trump's first term, Maduro was already charged with narco-terrorism in the US, and a bounty was put on his head. Now that bounty has increased to $50 million. That's twice the amount the US offered for Osama bin Laden.
What Nicolas Maduro has done is he has created a form of hybrid criminal governance. He's not running directly a drug trafficking organization. His regime has made alliances with criminal actors, including drug traffickers, and he is facilitating and protecting these businesses in exchange for the criminal rents he needs to maintain the loyalty to his regime.
So Trump does have a rationale if this is about fighting drugs. The US has a major drug problem. Hundreds of thousands have died in recent years from opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. Donald Trump promised to stop the flow of drugs. But the size of the Caribbean operation could also indicate something else.
Some think that part of the pressure is, at a minimum, to get the regime to change certain behaviors and provide concessions. And others think that it could be an effort to push Maduro out of power.
And that's what Maduro himself also seems to believe.
El objetivo es entrar y apoderarse de Venezuela y hacer un cambio de régimen en Venezuela.
Maduro has mobilized the population, warning he's ready to declare a state of emergency if the US attacks. Trump has authorized a CIA covert operation. So is the real US goal to take Maduro down? To understand what's at stake, we need to take a closer look at this country, which, by the way, has the largest oil reserves in the world. It shares a land border with 3 countries, and additionally has several island states close by.
I still think that Venezuela is very important geopolitically for the region, not only for the Caribbean, but the entire Latin America and South American geography.
Oskar Schlenker is DW's correspondent for Venezuela. Born and raised in the country, he's currently in Germany.
When our country was in better shape, we were the door to South America.
In the 1970s, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the region. The main reason? Those big oil reserves. For example, here, the Orinoco oil belt has huge potential, but it's far from being fully used. Today, after years of mismanagement, the Venezuelan oil industry is in disrepair. Corruption and organized crime is thriving, and the population is suffering from poverty, causing millions to leave the country. And growing tensions with the United States led to various sanctions starting in 2005, with Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez.
He had a really anti-American, anti-U.S. rhetoric. U.S. and Venezuelan relations have been really bad for a number of years now.
Chavez died in office in 2013. Maduro has since installed a ruthless authoritarian regime. When Trump was asked if he wanted a regime change, he downplayed the possibility.
Well, we're not talking about that, but we are talking about the fact that you had an election which was a very strange election.
The U.S. called the recent presidential elections in Venezuela illegitimate and does not recognize Maduro as the president. Opposition candidates have either fled the country or were forced into hiding. That includes opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for her persistent efforts to restore democracy and defend human rights in her country. Meanwhile, the U.S. is considering military strikes within Venezuela.
I think what the US is seeking to do here is to create fractures or ruptures within the Maduro regime. Everything depends on the military. in Venezuela. The military essentially supports the Maduro regime, and of course, it's the main instrument of repression.
And that military has profited from organized crime. So the idea might be weaken the system that keeps Maduro in power to eventually take him down in the process.
I think they are trying to do everything possible or everything at their disposition to try and damage Maduro's administration.
But let's keep in mind, it wouldn't be the first time the U.S. toppled a government led by someone wanted on U.S. drugs charges. That's what happened in Panama in 1989 when the U.S. invaded the country.
There is a historical fear that the U.S. will meddle in South America's affairs in a way that is not fair for South America. In all honesty, there's a lot of citizens that are just really tired of the current regime that's governing Venezuela, and they wouldn't mind having a regime change at whatever cost.
But hold on. Hasn't Trump promised to keep the U.S. out of new wars?
We will seek friendship and goodwill with the nations of the world. We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone.
But that might not apply to the region we're talking about. Now it's time to look at the Caribbean as a whole. Remember that U.S. naval base in Puerto Rico? This is Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, on a warship there.
This might be the single most beautiful picture I have ever seen in my entire life. Looking out at these faces, looking out at this Caribbean, on a floating island of American power.
The recent Caribbean deployment shows there's a shift to hard power.
The perception is the United States has become a bully, and you either do what you're told or you face sanctions of one type or another.
Recently, we called it shared neighborhood, but we might be returning to an older nomenclature of the U.S.'s backyard.
The U.S. operations in the Caribbean come after a few other moves by Trump in the Western Hemisphere. He threatened to take back the Panama Canal. We recently did a deep dive on this. And he, well, joked repeatedly about Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state. He also suggested using force to take Greenland from NATO ally Denmark. We also looked into that already. All this reminds many of a 200-year-old U.S. policy. The Monroe Doctrine is named after the 5th President of the United States. Back then, James Monroe basically warned European powers not to interfere or recolonize the Americas. For many, it seemed to proclaim that this part of the world was clearly a U.S. sphere of influence. Now, Trump seems to be pursuing a Monroe 2.0.
I think what it essentially means is that the United States wants to be the hegemonic power in its region. And it is the hegemonic power, certainly in the military sphere. But in the economic sphere, it has lost a lot of ground to China. And so it's pursuing policies that it feels will ensure that the region follows U.S. leadership.
And here is where that economic sphere really plays out, in Guyana, one of Venezuela's neighbors. The two countries have a decades-old border dispute, which involves oil-rich territories and a major offshore oil reserve. A reserve U.S. businesses have major interests in. To show support for Guyana, U.S. fighter jets made an appearance.
Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. military flyover. Put your hands together.
So there's also an effect to have the military presence in the region as a deterrent against Venezuela taking any action against Guyana or against the oil platforms in the region.
So how does all this resonate in the rest of the region? Not too badly. Some countries are responding positively to Trump's harsh war on drugs.
This rhetoric really resounds in a lot of poorer people in the hemisphere that are really suffering from the crime and how crime has developed in the region, which brings a lot of violence, a lot of deaths, and a lot of insecurity.
The Caribbean is one of the most violent regions in the world. So this isn't some abstract notion. This is something that tops the political agenda and tops citizen concerns.
One country that has even signaled support for the U.S. naval presence is Trinidad and Tobago, right next door to Venezuela. Regional allies are still on Venezuela's side. But what about Venezuela's partners further afield, like China and Russia?
I would have imagined China and Russia to be a little bit more outspoken about these issues, but we haven't heard that much from Putin or from Xi Jinping about it.
Oh, they love it. Well, I mean, if the U.S. Explicitly pursues a policy where it says we are the preeminent power in the Western Hemisphere, and we are going to consider it our sphere of influence, that then allows China and Russia to declare openly without fear that they're going to do the same thing in their regions.
So what at first glance is an illegal attack on boats in international waters seems to be a lot more.
It's too big to be a counter-narcotics operation. It may be too small to be something that could be used for regime change.
So part of the U.S. case is motivated by an actual attempt to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S.
Sources tell CBS News senior military officials have presented President Trump with options for potential military operations inside Venezuela, including potential strikes on land. This would be an escalation from the current campaign against alleged drug boats. Officials say the U.S. launched its 20th strike on Monday, killing 4 people. CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson has more.
CBS reported earlier this week that there was a meeting at the White House where Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the top U.S. military officer, General Dan Kane, presented President Trump with options on Venezuela, including potentially striking on land. That would be a shift. So far, the U.S. military has targeted speedboats in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific, allegedly carrying drugs, in an operation that Secretary Hegseth named yesterday, Operation Southern Spear. That meeting about options going forward comes as the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, and its escort ships are headed to join a growing armada already off of Venezuela. The Ford and its ships bring not only fighter aircraft, but also Tomahawk missiles with the range to strike inside Venezuela. If the president decides to go with that option, that would be a major escalation, making good on his threats that land strikes could be next. When the Ford joins the other ships in the Caribbean, it'll add to the total U.S. forces on Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, as well as Marine F-35s in Puerto Rico. There will be about 15,000 U.S. forces there, the largest U.S. military buildup since the Cold War.
Ellie Watson, thank you. CBS News Executive Director of Politics, Finn Gomez, is in Washington now with more. So, Finn, what more do we know about the White House's thinking about this?
Yeah, this is all about pressure, Lindsay, by the Trump administration, is spearheaded, of course, by President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio and other administration stakeholders that have long been calling for increased action against an authoritarian regime they hold responsible for not only destroying a once formidable South American country and ally into one they say adamantly has been one of the world's largest narco traffickers, working with cartels to flood the U.S. with fentanyl-laced cocaine and other drugs. If you recall, back in August August, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced a $50 million reward for the arrest of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and said the Justice Department had seized more than $700 million in assets linked to Maduro, including private jets, and also said that 7 million tons of seized cocaine have been traced directly to him. And now with this increased military presence and strategic attacks on these alleged drug boats, sources close to the White House say it is kicking up to a new level, Lindsay. One senior source close to the Trump administration said, quote, "It's not a good time to be Nicolas Maduro."
The United States is expanding its military presence in the Caribbean as the White House weighs possible action inside Venezuela. The Trump administration says the buildup is part of its war on drugs. Yesterday, the U.S. military confirmed it carried out its 20th strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean Sea. U.S. forces killed 4 people in the targeted attack, which happened on Monday. The U.S. is also ramping up its military might in Puerto Rico. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is there.
New Pentagon images show a B-52 long-range bomber flying over the USS Gerald R. Ford as it steams toward the Caribbean, a provocative display of the American military power that is now being staged against Venezuela. The Ford and the warships sailing with it will be bolstered by F-35 stealth fighter jets already operating in the area. Those F-35s are being flown out of this airfield in Puerto Rico. It's a base the Navy shut down more than 20 years ago, but it is back and operational as the United States builds up forces ahead of a possible military action against Venezuela. The military presence is drawing notice from locals like Damian Leon.
I feel tense, kind of anxious, not knowing what's going to happen, maybe an attack of someone close.
The Roosevelt Roads base is one of 5 locations where U.S. forces are now operating on an American territory strategically positioned north of Venezuela. Samuel Rivera Baez is the mayor of the town located just next to the base. The F-35s wake us up in the morning, he told us. But is there a concern that if the United States engages in Venezuela, that Puerto Rico might become a target? Right now, the United States is the most powerful in the world, he told us. Having them here, taking care of us, we feel more than safe. As the U.S. conducts live fire exercises in the region, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, whom the U.S. wants to remove from power for alleged cartel ties, spoke out against what he called threats of an invasion. Raise your hand if you want Venezuela to become a Yankee colony, he said.
Donald Trump has signaled that the U.S. is likely to scale up military action against Venezuela targeting alleged drug smuggling. A U.S. task force in the Caribbean is expanding rapidly and has carried out 20 strikes on suspected drug trafficking boats in the region. Donald Trump has threatened to expand these attacks onto Venezuelan soil, accusing President Nicolas Maduro of running a drug cartel. On board Air Force One, reporters pressed Trump on his plans.
I sort of have made up my mind, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you what it would be, but I sort of made up my mind.
What do you say to some of your supporters who might not be excited about another foreign campaign?
Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, I can't tell you what it is, but we made a lot of progress with Venezuela in terms of stopping drugs from pouring in.
And we can bring in John Feely, former U.S. ambassador to Panama and Marine helicopter pilot. He joins us from New York. Ambassador Feely, I'm going to ask you to get inside the president's head. What do you think Trump has in mind?
Well, first, I'd like to ask you for a hazmat suit before I go in there. Look, we're in the realm of speculation, so let me underscore that. I think that this president has been pressured into these actions, not wholly unwillingly, but I think that at this point, after 8 weeks of a demonstration of American military power, he has been convinced that he has to do something. The word he used with regard to Panama was something powerful when he was talking about taking back the canal. Now, the issue here, Michael, is that powerful is in the eye of the beholder. Is powerful killing Nicolas Maduro with a precision tomahawk strike? Is powerful perhaps sending several strikes into alleged narco trafficking centers, trying to provoke regime collapse as opposed to a regime change or a regime change via invasion of boots on the ground. All of these are options. And as we know, the president has been meeting with his closest security advisors over the last week. And I think even he realizes that the initial bluff didn't work. So now the problem with a bluff is that it has to be backed up with a credible use of force. What that force is, I don't think will be an invasion.
I appreciate that you bring up the fact that this is speculative, and I'm going to reiterate that. We are speculating, and much of the world is, at this hour. So far, the U.S. military has conducted operations against suspected drug vessels in the region. Could they escalate their operations there? If so, what's likely to be the next powerful action?
Sure, they could absolutely escalate from a technical military perspective, and I speak having flown off of the Iwo Jima amphibious assault ship many, many years ago. There are lots of things that the U.S. military could do. For example, that are short, I should say, of a boots-on-the-ground invasion. They could use that standoff Tomahawk missile capability to hit places that they allege, and that very well may be centers of narcotics trafficking activity. They could try to take out the air defense systems, which I think they could probably do relatively easily. They could conduct serious flyovers with the F-35s that are stationed in Ceiba, in Puerto Rico. There's any number of what the U.S. Department of Defense calls kinetic actions that they could take. What none of these military actions, which are relatively straightforward, what none of them can predict, and where all of us who are looking at this situation with great concern wonder is, okay, and what happens the day after?
The big step, of course, no pun intended, is, of course, boots on the ground, which you just referred to. What are the implications of that, and what are the risks of doing so?
Ooh, the implications are disastrous for Donald Trump in terms of domestic politics in the United States. Look, Trump and the Republicans just got their sort of electoral ticket handed right back to them in two key states, in the city of New York, and on a very important proposal to redistrict in California. All of that spelt bad news. Donald Trump is having a really bad day with regard to the Epstein files. The politics in the United States right now is not favorable to Donald Trump. He just rescinded last night a whole host of the tariffs he had put on. So he's clearly on his heels, on the defensive. That would argue for many people to conclude, well, he's got to do something big and he's got to do something aggressive and he's got to show that he's top dog in Venezuela. Well, first of all, top dog in Venezuela doesn't really matter to the unemployed gig worker in Idaho. So he's got to think long and hard about putting American blood and treasure to risk on the shores of Venezuela. The other thing he has to do, and we would know this because we would see if the 82nd Airborne or the 101st Airborne are mobilized. Those Marines, Michael, they can take about a kilometer and a half, maybe, of Venezuelan territory. They're only 2,200. Venezuela is a country of 28 million people. This is not right now a force in the Caribbean that is ready for an invasion. There would need to be a lot more boots prepared a lot more visibly before he moves forward. I think what you're going to see are some separate missile strikes.
You just painted a very realistic, some would argue a very sober picture there on the presidential landscape. It's part of the reason why the idea of military action inside Latin America, in this particular Latin American country, I should mention, is unpopular among U.S. voters. So why would that be a risk this president might be willing to take?
Look, you just said it. It is unpopular. According to a Reuters Ipsos poll, and most people give it strong credibility, Only 21% of the American people, Michael, think that military action to depose Nicolas Maduro is a good idea at this point. What I think this president has to contend with is a very strong lobby of Marco Rubio and other primarily South Florida-based politicians who have long wanted to replace Nicolas Maduro and get him out of there.
Right.
But then he has to balance it against the broader American public.
And we'll have to end it there. That is a John Feely, former U.S. ambassador to Panama and Marine helicopter pilot. Really appreciate your time and perspective, sir.
The tiny Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago says it will conduct 5 days of military drills with the U.S. starting tomorrow. The islands are right off the coast of Venezuela. The last several weeks, the U.S. has built up its forces in the Caribbean, including its largest aircraft carrier. The USS Gerald Ford is in position there. While on Air Force One Friday, President Trump was asked about his intentions in Venezuela.
Have you made up your mind on what you'd like to do as far as action?
I sort of have made up my mind, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you what it would be, but I sort of made up my mind.
The U.S. has launched 20 attacks on boats in the Caribbean, saying they were targeting drug traffickers. CNN's Stefano Posaban is in the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. Stefano, how is Venezuela reacting to all of this?
Well, I think that Venezuela, Federica, is bracing for something to happen in the next few hours, weeks, days. We really don't know when that could happen, but the idea of Donald Trump saying that he has sort of made up his mind, and then subsequently we learn that there are military exercises, drills off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago, which, by the way, it's really just a 20 miles boat ride from Trinidad and Tobago to get into Venezuela, to get into an area that is notoriously for the drug trafficking. It feels like that is yet another step, that we've been here, we've seen the tide coming every week that has passed. There has been a consequential step that it's getting closer and closer to potentially the United States really taking direct action within Venezuela. That would be a strike on Venezuelan territory, which is frankly unheard of. The Venezuelan president has been on television almost every day this past week, always trying to present himself as a peaceful negotiator, asking for peace and asking not to open yet another endless war. Take a listen.
It is to the people of the United States that I speak to at this moment, before these 100 jurors from 34 countries, to say, stop the insane hand of those who order bombing, killing, and bringing war to South America, to the Caribbean. Stop the war. No to war.
More closer to home in the next few hours here in Caracas, we will once again see supporters of Nicolas Maduro taking to the streets, especially in the slums to the east of where I am. It's not really massive mobilizations. The government of Nicolas Maduro is not popular right now here in Venezuela after more than 10 years of deep authoritarian repressive rule. However, it still can mobilize thousands, if not tens of thousands of people across the nation, and that is why I think that they're trying to move their base, try to raffle up their bases to prepare for what could well indeed happen very soon.
All right, lots of volatility. Stefano Posaban in Venezuela, thanks so much.
America's greatest ally thinks America is doing illegal things. In a dramatic move, the UK has stopped sharing intelligence with the United States over Donald Trump's deadly boat strikes in the Caribbean. The Brits don't want to be complicit in what they see as illegal attacks. That is their concern. So far, the strikes have targeted 20 boats, killed at least 80 people, in what the administration now calls Southern Spear as their operation against alleged drug trafficking. This comes as the Pentagon is now giving President Trump options, the reporting is, for military action in and against Venezuela. What do you think of this?
This is a very big deal. I've sat on the other end of British counterparts and been that official they're engaging with to talk about intelligence sharing on sensitive issues. And that was in the first Trump administration. And look, we did a lot of stupid things in the first Trump administration that we were rightfully repudiated for, but we never had the Brits say to us, we're not going to share information with you anymore. This is the special relationship. This is our closest ally. This is a very big repudiation, and it does signal that they not only think the strikes are illegal, but probably that more of our allies think what's happening is unlawful.
The former commander of Southern Command was on my show and said, like, this does not happen very often. This is a significant thing. And right now in the Caribbean, they believe is the largest concentration of U.S. naval forces anywhere in the world in the Caribbean right now, which leads to, how is this not going to end up with the United States starting a war?
But do you not like that? I like being protected from all these drug boats coming into Miami.
How do you know they're drug boats? How do you know they're drug boats?
Well, I'm sure Intel tells them that because we're not just blowing random things up. But here's the thing.
You're sure?
Look, I'm in Miami. I'm a representative in Miami. I don't like them coming to our shores and then drugs working its way up the I-95 to kind of spread drugs and guns, and it leads to prostitution and other things and other crimes. I don't like that. Why don't we cut off the supply chain in the waters before it even lands on U.S. soil?
Well,
What's wrong with that?
You do that with law enforcement.
Yeah.
I've overseen these operations before. If you have the ability to lawfully intercept a boat, the laws of proportionality say you go with the least destructive measure. This is not warfare. This is not a battlefield. We didn't launch an airstrike at Jeffrey Epstein's condo. He was a criminal. He was a pedo. He did bad things. No, you go arrest that person. Those boats are very easy to intercept.
I've watched the Coast Guard
intercept those boats.
They're very easy to intercept. Outgrowth of the war on drugs, which we lost, which we see does not work. We cannot police our way out of it. If you really are concerned with drug use, the only way is legalization. The only way to move beyond criminal drug usage, criminal drug pushing, is to have the government take control of that, right? Tax people, have it moderated. If we'd done this show in 1920, I would have said, we should legalize liquor. And you would have said, that's insane. We can't do that. We have done that, and we are fine as a society. There would have been a time we said, legalizing marijuana, that's insane. We did that. We have not fallen apart as a society.
It's a great theory.
Marijuana is legal in this city.
Fantastic theory in the classroom.
But it's the only way to that is how we have dealt with marijuana, the marijuana criminalization.
Here in New York and other blue cities, in red cities like Miami, we got rid of Proposition 4 on our ballots because we didn't want we didn't want the drugs on our streets.
We have about 24 states where marijuana is legal now. It's not just blue cities.
One question of where does this go is there's privately at the White House, there's an acknowledgement that they would like Maduro to leave. Obviously, Maduro is saying, the president of Venezuela, is saying that this is all this is about, is that they're trying to force regime change. If officials in the White House, Lance, start saying the quiet part out loud, I mean, I've heard Lindsey Graham say, yeah, I think that's likely what he wants to see happen. Isn't that antithetical to what the MAGA base wants?
No, not at all. I mean, let's remember, Venezuela is, back up. Barack Obama labeled them a national security threat back in 2015. They have been on a threat with human rights and everything else. They are the cog of all of the drug trade going on around the Americas to Europe and everything. That is absolutely a fact. They are also a cog for
Colombia and Mexico are much stronger than Venezuela.
I let
on
you
this
speak your
issue.
socialist stuff. Give me a second here. They are also the cog for Iran, Russia, and China, where they all meet up. I don't know what President Trump's going to do on this stuff, but I would not want to be Maduro right now. They have a lot of problems. If we got democracy in that country, it would mean a lot for our national security. It would mean a lot to ending this scourge of drugs in this country and helping out the entire region.
I love the whole notion that we're just saying we're going to just dethrone their leader and impose democracy, which has worked so well in the Middle East. I mean, I know that's what we do in America, that we take leaders we don't like and push them aside and try to plant democracy there. It generally doesn't work, but that's not legal, and that's not the way we're supposed to.
I don't disagree with Lance and Angie. Maduro is a very, very bad dude. I got no love loss for these drug runners either. But look, the really important thing we need to focus on here, and I mean this, and I'm serious as a heart attack, people are going to go to prison for doing this. People are breaking the law for killing subjects that the laws of war say they can't. I want these guys to rot behind bars, but you can't just go kill people that don't represent an imminent threat to you. That's scary. It sets a bad precedent.
I also heard one person say an interesting bit, if you really do want Maduro to go, is that what you're doing with these strikes is you are destroying all of the evidence, actually connecting Maduro to pushing drugs into the United States.
That's why we arrest people.
Which is why you arrest, why you investigate, and that is not what is being left behind when you're sending hellfire missiles at a canoe. But I digress.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has criticized joint naval exercises between U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago that are set to begin this weekend. The drills come as part of a U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean and follow a string of attacks on vessels it claims are smuggling drugs. In his address to supporters, Maduro also left aside the usual rhetoric and took a different, more musical approach.
Imagine there's no heaven. Venezuela's President Maduro takes an alternative approach to calling for de-escalation with the United States, using John Lennon's anthemic Imagine. Imagine us people. The song might call for the world to live as one, but the heightened military tensions in the Caribbean, including the USS Gerald Ford seen here in September, are anything but unifying. On Friday, the US released this footage of what it says is a, quote, lethal strike on a vessel involved in narcotics smuggling earlier this week. It also announced it will conduct a new round of military exercises in the Caribbean, this time with Trinidad and Tobago, once again raising the ire of President Maduro.
The government of Trinidad and Tobago has once again announced irresponsible exercises, lending its waters off the coast of Venezuela for military drills intended to threaten a republic like ours, which does not allow itself to be threatened by anyone.
Speaking on Air Force One, Donald Trump told reporters a decision could come soon on whether to take military action against Venezuela.
Tell us what your next steps will be. But can you say, have you made up your mind on what you'd like to do for as far as action?
I sort of have made up my mind, you know. I mean, I can't tell you what it would be, but I sort of made up my mind.
What?
Trump's mounting force in the region has faced pushback from US allies. At a G7 meeting in Canada, France's foreign minister said the targeting of boats in the Caribbean disregarded international law.
As Donald Trump is being briefed on military options in Venezuela, that country's president has a stark warning about a, quote, forever war. This as Nicolas Maduro launched a cross-country military exercise with some 200,000 forces.
Donald Trump.
The authoritarian leader is accused of enabling large-scale narcotics trafficking in that hemisphere. The U.S. Defense Secretary posted, quote, "The Western Hemisphere is America's neighborhood, and we will protect it." The mission is being called Operation Southern Spear, and America is putting the world's biggest, most advanced aircraft carrier off the Venezuelan coast, loaded with 4 squadrons of Super Hornets, an F-18 variant squadron, 2 helicopter squadrons, and that's just a few of the assets. All this is raising questions if the mission is potentially also opening up to ousting the Venezuelan leader. James Story is a former U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, and he joins us now. Mr. Ambassador, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me today.
Well, America's most advanced and the world's largest U.S. carrier will be sitting off the coast of Venezuela. That's a 100,000-ton warship, and its strike group doesn't exactly scream, "We're just fighting the drug trade." What do you think Donald Trump's endgame is here?
Well, certainly much more capacity than you need to go after small fishing vessels running loads of cocaine up the coast. So, from the very beginning, under the first Trump administration, the president said all options are on the table. And I believe that he now has those options arrayed around the theater. Certainly, this is a pressure campaign against the Maduro regime, against those around Maduro. And the hope for, I believe the policy is that somebody close to Maduro will show him the exit in order to start the hard process of rebuilding democracy in that country. That's what I believe that the forces are really there for.
Now, as you mentioned, since September, the U.S. has destroyed boats, killed men it alleged were involved in the drug trade. Do you think that was sort of phase one that's leading into this part of the mission?
Certainly what the president has done is laid out an argument, and you can debate the argument, of course, but he laid out an argument for the extension of executive power and the use of force. I mean, Congress has been out of session. It's now back, or government is now functioning again to the extent that it functions. And they're going to have to take up this question of the authorized use of military force. But certainly, stage one was going after narcotics trafficking. And listen, the regime in Caracas is a criminal organization masquerading as a government. They're involved in this, not only in that, but in lots of other nefarious activity.
Yeah, most viewers would agree that ousting a dictator like this can be a noble goal. And you just said Maduro's government is a criminal organization masquerading as a government. But if America were to aim to oust Maduro, does that not open up greater concerns about America forcing leadership change in other countries?
I mean, certainly that's a question. But let's also look at just the going after the narcotics trafficking itself. If that is going after terrorist organizations, then what about the people who use drugs? What's the definition of what about the companies in China that are producing the drugs? I mean, you can get to an illogical end game here. I certainly think that in the region, there's going to be a lot of antibodies to an American action like this. The fact of the matter is, we haven't done anything like this since Operation Just Cause in 1989. Now, I will submit that Panama is much better off today without Manuel Noriega than it would have been had he remained in power. But having said that, this is not, the Colin Powell doctrine. If you break it, you buy it. This is not going to be necessarily a straightforward, linear process either. The decision is taken.
It does feel like even though we're witnessing sort of a buildup in a way we haven't seen before, it looks like we still don't know what path the U.S. government, by way of the military, is going to take. In other words, options are still on the table, are they not? We haven't closed any doors to, say, a diplomatic resolution.
Well, if you'd asked me 2 months ago, I would have said, in policy, maintaining the status quo and doing nothing, that's the easiest thing to do, right? I mean, just keep doing what you're doing. If you asked me 2 months ago, I'd have said maybe 10% chance we do something, maybe 10% chance we even open an embassy, because at that time, Rick Grenell was operating in the country, doing things that frankly were criticized under the Biden administration. Fast forward, we now have way too many resources in the region. It definitely seems like we're ripe to actually take some kind of action. Now, that could be against a clandestine airstrip south of Lake Maracaibo, against the FARC, the ELN, the Tren de Aragua, the Cartel de los Soles, a specific group, or there are enough resources in the region to take out the military in Venezuela and the government, were the president to choose so. I think you're going to see an escalation over time.
And what do you think this escalation, what do you think this new posturing is doing to the power brokers inside Venezuela right now? What sort of discussions are they having?
Well, they're discomfited, to say the least. I would be discomfited by a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier off the coast. I'd be discomfited by F-35s or B-1 bombers or B-52s. There's no level of comfort here among those people. There's also no level of love lost from Maduro. He is a really isolated figure. He was roundly voted out of office last July. Very few people in the military have a high opinion of him. He never served himself. I don't believe anybody is going to jump in a Sukhoi and go after an F-35, right? And I think what you'll see is the quick dissolution of military force, which is also problematic because at the end of the day, in Venezuela, you have so many illegal armed groups operating. When the day comes that Maduro is no longer in power, you're going to have to deal with some illegality, criminality, illegal armed groups, terrorist organizations, and you kind of need the military to help you do that.
Well, let's start with let's paint a picture rather of the Venezuelan military. What's the state of it today?
Well, I can tell you a couple of years ago, they ran military exercises and they included countries that don't even exist, such as South Ossetia, and they lost to everybody. You have a 40% desertion rate among the rank and file. Their equipment is, if it's not obsolete, it's not been maintained. When I saw that Russian airplane come down, I immediately thought, well, they're going to try to get their airplanes operational again. They're going to work on the surface air missile batteries. They're not training, they're not maintaining, they're not equipping. In the show of some civilian force, the militia coming out, running around, people who are either very old or out of shape, holding wooden guns, this kind of thing. Those people are not going to engage in hostilities against the United States or anyone else. The state of the military is deplorable because, like the rest of the country, they've done nothing to invest in it over the last 25 years.
Mr. Ambassador, we've touched on the leadership. We've touched on the state of the military. What about the people on the ground? You were the last U.S. Diplomatic member in Venezuela. What do you have a sense of the people on the ground? How are the civilians faring? How were they faring when you were there?
Well, they were faring terribly while I was there, and nothing has gotten easier for them over time. That's why you have maybe 9 million Venezuelans who have fled the country. When you put that in perspective, that would be as if 40 or 50 million people from the United States up and left the country. It's just incredible. So, they haven't fared well. The educational system is broken. The health system is broken. I went into hospitals. I went into universities. I went into primary schools. Nothing is working. Nothing has been maintained. There's no opportunity. There are no prospects. The economy has been dollarized, and that's made it a little more stable for the hyperinflation issue. But the fact of the matter is, people don't have jobs. They don't have enough to eat. They don't have food and medicine. They don't have hope. And the hope part of this is why they went out en masse and voted against Maduro last July.
Well, this does seem to be shaping up as a sort of a power play between two powerful figures, Donald Trump and Maduro. But what are the neighboring countries in the region saying or feeling about this rise in tensions?
Well, President Petro in Colombia sees himself as more of a regional figure, an international figure, a historic figure, a leader of the left, ideologically speaking. He's been very outspoken against the activities in the region. And listen, reasonable people can agree or disagree on what's been happening in the Caribbean. For me, as I ran counter-narcotics for Western Hemisphere for the State Department and in Colombia, there's a reason you judicialize these cases. You go after organizations, and there's a reason that you operate in cooperation with other nations. And I think the kind of back and forth, will the Colombians share intel with us or not? I think they're sharing less than they used to share. We're working less closely. And with Brazil, I'd say President Lula also is offering to help mediate. He's not going to be particularly fond of any kind of direct action from the United States. Fundamentally, unilateral action in the region withdraws us away from working in cooperation with our allies in the region. When you have a transnational criminal organization, you have to work with more than one country. You have to work regionally, and that's been affected negatively.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Venezuela, James Story, thank you for joining us on the West Block.
Thanks so much for having me today.